Hello again, and welcome once more to Denton's Tales. And now, once again, we travel back to the so-called Viking Age. I suppose this is really a bit of a clue, isn't it? Anyway, the first Viking raids on the British Isles began in the late 8th century AD, in 793 to be precise, when the Old Norse actually became Vikings. Since the term Vikinger, well, it meant a seafarer, a pirate, an adventurer, and one only became Vikinger by getting into a ship, going somewhere in the ship, and doing, well, something or other when one got to wherever one got in the ship, be it raiding, trading, founding settlements, or whatever, but the ship was required. Now, you're trotted off in a ship, and you were a Viking. Oh, yes. Staying on dry land back home, and well, you were just a Norwegian, a Swede, or a Dane. Bit boring, I suppose, really. But anyway, so 793 AD is seen as the beginning of the so-called Viking Age, with the raid on the monastic island of Lindisfarne, or Lindisfarne as it is today, in the kingdom of Northumbria, which saw the destruction of the much venerated shrine of St. Cuthbert. Now that sent shockwaves across the Anglo-Saxon world. And that age ended in 1066 with the death of the great king of Norway, Harald Hardrada, at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Now, some minor raids did occur after that date, but 1066, well, it's a memorable date, it's easy to remember, and it is usually given as the end of the Viking Age. Now, I do have to point out that it wasn't actually the first Norse incursion into the Anglo-Saxon world. No, there had been one 4 years earlier. Now, I will just do that. The first Norse incursion into England wasn't really a raid as such. It wasn't a go ashore, grab whatever loot you could carry, burn a few things, rape some women, and then get the hell out of there as fast as possible. Oh, no. It was more of a limited occupation, you might say, and it occurred in 789 AD. When 3 ships landed on the coast of Wessex, the Norsemen demanding tolls from passing ships and, well, shall we say, voluntary contributions that you really better give them if you want to keep your head from the local English. Now, King Beorhtric of Wessex sent his bailiff, a man called Bidehud, and he was to find out who these people were, why they hadn't declared their intentions, and, most importantly, why they were demanding tolls that should be going to him. Now, he wasn't at all pleased about that, but the encounter didn't go very well, and the king's bailiff and his men were killed, the Norsemen withdrawing soon after. So you could, I suppose, reasonably date the Viking Age from 789 if you wanted to. I mean, they came in ships, thus being genuine Vikings, but as I say, it wasn't a raid as such, so does it or doesn't it qualify? Well, you can decide that one. The Viking raiders got around to Ireland quite quickly. Their distinctive dragon or sea serpent-headed ships with their square sails, already a most unwelcome sight in England, began to appear in the Irish Sea in 795, landing in Wales and the Isle of Man, and then turning their attention westwards, attacking either the island of Lambay, lying just off the coast near present-day Dublin, or Rathlin Island, which is much further north off the coast of Antrim. It isn't quite clear which, since the Annals of Ulster use a word to describe it, which could mean either location, but it doesn't really matter which one. The event itself is what is important. The raiders then turned their attention to the west coast, attacking Inishmurray in County Sligo and Inishbofin in County Galway. Raids continued, intensifying as time went on, with wealthy monastic sites and churches being the favourite targets. Now, one has to remember most of the wealth of the time was held by, yes, the church. So that was the place to go if you wanted financial rewards, and the Viking raiders wanted that very, very much. They didn't hate Christianity. They really didn't care very much about it one way or the other. They simply wanted its wealth, and they did a pretty good job of forcefully obtaining it. The coastal raids intensified, as did attacks that took place far inland, with monastic sites, of course, being the favourite targets, such as Glendalough, Clonard, Lismore, Monasterboice, Ferns, Kildare, Clondalkin, slain, and in 852 AD, Armagh, the religious capital of Ireland, was destroyed. But, you see, there was a problem of logistics involved in raiding. The raiders often having to come very considerable distances, either sailing right around the top of Scotland, quite a hazardous voyage through very stormy seas, or around the south coast of England and then up the Irish Sea, though a few may have come from Wales. But overall, a lot of sailing was required. A solution to that problem was required, and they found it. The Norsemen began to establish fortified encampments called Longpheorts or Longports around the coast, where they could safely berth their ships and repair them and have some quality of life while they did it. A sort of combination settlement and ship repair yard, you could say, thus enabling them to raid from there and then remain and winter in Ireland rather than returning to their bases in Britain or Scandinavia. These longports would be placed along a river, usually close to the sea for easy access, and they would have a bank and ditch, probably with a wooden palisade on top, forming a sort of D shape, with the straight side of the D being the river. The first of these were a Norwegian camp on the River Liffey, where modern Dublin stands, and another one in the region of present-day Annagassan in County Louth. Later encampments were set up at Leixlip, Clondalkin, Strangford, Youghal, Arklow and Carlingford. Other longports sprang up as time went on, some of them becoming major towns in Ireland. Since, you see, Ireland was a village society, you might say, before the arrival of the Norse. And our principal cities today we owe to the Norse, not the native Irish: Dublin, Limerick, Cork, Wexford, Waterford, among others. Now, the longports could be very considerable in size, like those constructed later in England by the Great Heathen Army in 872 AD, such as the one at Torksey, situated on the River Trent in modern-day Lincolnshire, and using the river as part of the fortifications, where excavations showed it to have covered over 130 acres. And there was considerable evidence of the presence of women and children, of metalworking and other day-to-day activities. Another impressive camp was set up at Repton. Again, like the Torksey encampment, it had a more or less D-shaped rampart comprising an earthen bank with a wooden palisade and a ditch, forming the curve of the D, while the straight part was formed by the River Trent. And it very cleverly incorporated a Christian church in its defences. Yes, a Christian church incorporated into the pagan defences. The building lying lengthways almost at the centre of and in the earthen rampart forming the D. And it's thought that the doors of the church provided an easily defended access into the enclosure, sort of ready-made gatehouse, you could say. A fine example of utilising local features to assist with the construction. Now, at one time, it was thought that the camp had been entirely within the defensive rampart, which I suppose would seem logical, and that was assumed for other longports as well. But archaeologists from Bristol University found that extensive structures existed far beyond the rampart, including ship repair yards and metalworking sites, much as had been the case at Torksey. They found special roved nails used in the construction of ships, battle axes, arrows, and gaming pieces made out of lead, as well as a mass grave containing over 260 bodies. The Repton camp and the Torksey one are considerable sites in Viking history, and of course it showed that they were not simply confined just to a defensive perimeter. They extended far, far beyond it. But back to Ireland. The first record of the Vikings remaining for an entire winter in Ireland comes from Lough Neagh, 840 to 841, followed by a permanent settlement that grew into a town on the River Liffey that they called Dublin, from the Irish Duv Linn, the dark pool, which became Dublin, where they spent the winter of 841 to 842. Strangely enough, there were actually two towns side by side, the Viking Dublin close to the mouth of the river, and an Irish town called Aclea, the ford of the Hurdles, which lay further upriver. Dublin, of course, became the principal Norse settlement in Ireland. Not the capital of Norse Ireland, since the various Norse settlements were very much independent of one another, but it would eventually evolve into the capital of Ireland. But it almost didn't. Yes, Ireland's principal city could well have been much further north, called Linduchil, or the Pool of Duul. Now, this was mentioned in the Irish annals in the early 840s, one stating that it was founded by a Viking leader they called Turgesius, at or near Annagassan, which lies in the townland of Ballinagasin, midway between Dundalk and Drogheda in County Louth, where the River Glyde empties into the Irish Sea. Today it's a tiny little village with a population of only 189 in the 2022 census. Would you even call it a village? It's more a collection of houses, I suppose. Though in its Viking days, it probably had a population of thousands. Turgesius was a Latinized form of Thurgesta, who had established the fort on Loch Ness, as well as one on Loch Ree and Loch Lean. An island in the latter actually still bears his name, Turgesius Island, and he sacked the wealthy monastic site at Clonmacnoise while he was at it. The following year he led a force of over 120 ships, some going up the River Boyne and the rest taking the Irish fishing village that lay near the mouth of the River Liffey and making it into a longport, with a fort situated on the hill where Dublin Castle would later be built. The Irish annals credited Thurgesta with the foundation of the longports at Dublin and Linduchil, from which the surrounding territories were plundered. Oh, yes. Nothing remains, of course, of the Dublin site, but in 2010, after a long search, archaeologists discovered Linduchil at the village of Annagassan. A fortified area consisting of a circular bank and ditch is clearly visible even to this day, especially from the air, where it's extremely obvious, backing onto the River Glyde, just opposite where the old bridge crosses the river, with the river forming the straight side of the D shape. But that would have been only a small part of the settlement, a fortified area protecting the ships being repaired and others moored nearby. The whole site seems to have covered some 150 acres, making it even larger than the one at Torksey, with the modern village thought by some archaeologists to be built on a man-made polder, which would have given greater shelter for the ships. The population was probably in the region of 5,000, with maybe hundreds of ships. And it seems to have continued to be a base for raiding for quite some time, while Dublin developed into a centre of trade and commerce rather than a base for raids. The Norse seem to have been expelled from Linduchil around 891 AD, but they returned some years later, finally leaving in 927 AD. An interesting note about that departure is that a Viking was said to have been left behind when they finally withdrew, missing the boat quite literally in his case. But apparently he was happy enough to stay where he was, and the local Irish presumably didn't object, and he settled down there. Local tradition telling of a seafaring man of Scandinavian appearance and very large, mythic proportions, it was said, who lived in the village and was nicknamed the Bear, which seems a pretty appropriate sort of a name, I suppose. Gradually, the longports became towns, some growing into cities, altering Ireland's village culture. Fierce Viking raiders replaced by usually peaceful settlers. No longer Vikings in the true sense of that word, since Vikinger meant a seafarer, a pirate, etc. One had to go off in a ship somewhere in order to be a Vikinger, so those living in the growing Norse settlements were just townspeople engaged in commerce, agriculture, and all the other aspects of life in a settled community. Intermarriage with the native Irish and conversion to Christianity, of course, helped very considerably in that regard. Thus we conclude this little look at the longports and their place in the history of Ireland. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you will tune in for the next video. Goodbye for now.